Laudetur Jesus Christus. Vatican and World News.
In the headlines this Thursday, April the 15th, human rights observers accuse Eritrea of extrajudicial killings in Ethiopia. An Irish bishop decries a delay in resettling refugee children detained in the Moria migrant camp in Greece. And 2 years from the fire that gutted Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral, we hear how it's being put back on the path to its ancient glory. In the Vatican, I'm Linda Bordoni. According to Amnesty International, Eritrean soldiers opened fire on civilians in Ethiopia's Tigray region, killing 3 people and wounding at least 19. Nathan Morley reports.
Amnesty says the attack took place in Adwa on Monday, more than a fortnight after the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said that Eritrea had agreed to withdraw its forces. They had sent soldiers to the northern Ethiopian region during the recent conflict which broke out late last year. Eritrea has not commented on the latest incident, but has previously denied reports that Eritreans committed mass killings and rapes. In a separate development, the United Nations Refugee Agency says that ethnic and tribal clashes in Sudan's western Darfur region have now forced nearly 2,000 people into neighbouring Chad. Renewed violence at the start of this month between Masalit and Arab tribes over land and water resources has killed scores of people, injured hundreds and displaced thousands. According to the UN, the clashes in the capital of West Darfur have forced over 1,500 people, mostly women, children and the elderly, to flee into Chad in the last 7 days. The latest arrivals join 145,000 existing refugees from Darfur. Conditions on the ground are described as being dire, as people lack shelter and have to sleep in the open air. As it stands, the UN aid agencies are urging the Sudanese government to deploy security forces to keep peace in Darfur. Speaking to the media, a UN spokesman said it was unclear from where the money to support the refugees will come, as UNHCR has received just 16% of its appeal for humanitarian operations. For Vatican Radio, this is Nathan Morley reporting.
The French embassy, meanwhile, has advised all French nationals and companies to leave Pakistan after violent protests by a far-right party accused French President Emmanuel Macron of blasphemy. Francesca Merlo tells us more.
The advice to French nationals to temporarily leave Pakistan came from the French embassy itself. Speaking anonymously on Thursday, a government official warned that due to the serious threats to French interests in Pakistan, French nationals and French companies are advised to temporarily leave the country. A second French official said that while the embassy in the Pakistani capital Islamabad would remain open, some staff would also be leaving the country. Anger has risen in Pakistan's far-right Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan TLP party once again. The party first held protests in November against comments made by French President Emmanuel Macron that were deemed by many, including Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, to be encouraging Islamophobia. These protests settled after the TLP reached an agreement with the Pakistani government. This included a request to expel the French ambassador in Pakistan, boycotting all French goods and taking other steps before Parliament. After months of calm, however, violent protests have broken out again this week after the government arrested TLP chief Saad Rizvi. His arrest comes just 20 days ahead of the TLP issued April 20th deadline for the expulsion of the French envoy. Over the last week of protests, at least 2 policemen have been killed and hundreds more, along with protesters, have been wounded in clashes. On Wednesday, Interior Minister Sheikh Rashid said the government had cleared most protests and was moving to ban the TLP under anti-terrorism legislation. The November protests were instigated by Macron's support for the right to republish cartoons depicting Prophet Muhammad that many Muslims consider to be blasphemous. These same caricatures are often viewed by many as Islamophobic. In Pakistan, blasphemy is a crime that can carry the death penalty. I'm Francesca Merlo.
The United States has announced sanctions against Russia in response to what it says are cyber attacks and other hostile acts. The sanctions target dozens of Russian entities, officials and diplomats. The US accuses Russia of malicious cyber activity and interference in presidential elections. The Russian government has denied the allegations and called any new sanctions illegal. Meanwhile, in the US state of Louisiana, rescuers are searching for the missing crew members of a large commercial vessel after it capsized. The US Coast Guard confirmed one person was found dead and 6 others had been rescued. 12 people are still missing. A lift boat capsized about 12 kilometres from Port Fourchon on Tuesday afternoon. The Bishop of Ferns in Ireland has criticised a delay in resettling children to Ireland from the Moria refugee camp on the Greek island of Lesbos. Lydia O'Kane has more on the story.
Bishop Denis Brennan of Ferns and chair of the Irish Bishops' Council for Immigrants said he was deeply saddened to hear recent reports that plans to resettle children seeking refuge from the Moria camp on the Greek island of Lesbos to Ireland have been further delayed. The Irish government had agreed to relocate 28 children in Ireland in the wake of the massive fire which engulfed the camp in September 2020. Referring to the devastating fire which exacerbated the already cramped, unhygienic and inhumane conditions in the camp, the bishop said the commitment made by the government to relocate the children from the Moria camp to Ireland was, in the circumstances, good news. However, he also said it represented the bare minimum support and refuge that we should be offering, particularly to unaccompanied children who have suffered so much trauma in even their earliest years. The bishop described the 7-month delay as appalling, adding, for anyone and especially for a child on their own, another day, another month living in fear in dire conditions in a refugee camp is another day of suffering and trauma that no one should have to endure. He also noted that Pope Francis has called again and again on the international community to do more in the face of this devastating global reality of our time. The plan to bring the child refugees to Ireland had run into difficulties over concerns that a deployment of the Irish police or Garda to Greece to do security checks on the refugees would be a breach of safety regulations relating to COVID-19. Concluding his statement, Bishop Brennan called on the Irish government to act as quickly and decisively as possible in this case to bring these children to safety and shelter here in Ireland, and to look at any way in which we can seek to accommodate more than a mere 28 unaccompanied minors. In our own country, he said, where so many have emigrated seeking welcome on our shores, let us be generous in responding when we are asked to do the same for others.
Thanks there to Lydia O'Kane for that report. Meanwhile, in COVID-related news, the Irish government ministers have insisted that the Republic is on course to continue a cautious reopening of society in May and to meet its end of June vaccination target. Catholics in South Korea are responding to the call of Pope Francis to share COVID-19 vaccines with poor countries that are unable to afford them. The Archbishop of Seoul has urged the faithful to participate in a fund that will be sent to the Vatican to help people in lower-income countries to have access to the life-saving doses. Robin Gomes has more.
Cardinal Andrew Yom-Soo-jong of Seoul launched the vaccine-sharing campaign in his archdiocese on Easter Sunday. It will run until November the 27th, the last day of the Jubilee of the 200th anniversary of the birth of St. Andrew Kim Tae-gon, the first native Catholic priest and patron of Korea. Delivering his Easter homily, the 77-year-old cardinal recalled that Pope Francis has several times called for universal access to vaccines. In solidarity with the Pope's exhortation, he said, the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Korea, CBCK, in its Spring General Assembly in March, decided to launch the vaccine-sharing campaign to support the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, particularly to the world's poorest countries. We are living through difficult times caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Archbishop of Seoul noted, adding, the social and economic crisis remains severe, especially for those who live in poverty. Because it is the weak and the poor who suffer the most when a crisis hits, he said, he would like to turn this crisis into an opportunity to show our solidarity with parishes, organizations and congregations around the world and lend a helping hand to those in need. Meanwhile, the Catholic Lay Apostolate Council of Seoul and the Catholic Peace Broadcasting Corporation will run a telephone campaign to raise funds for the vaccine sharing campaign. A theme song and a music video has been planned to inform and inspire people across the nation. Earlier in January, CBCK President Archbishop Matthias Lee Yong-hun of Suwon said the world needs to respond to the pandemic with the virtue of hope. Noting that the health crisis has caused the loss of many lives and livelihoods, he said all are called to support and encourage each other. Other Korean bishops have also encouraged donations from their faithful. I am Robin Gomes.
2 years after a devastating fire blazed through the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, specialists are still working hard on its restoration. Bishop Éric Aumonier, representative of the Diocese of Paris for the restoration of the cathedral, describes the work done so far on the centuries-old church. Father Benedict Mayaki has the story.
On the 15th of April 2019, the world watched in horror as flames ravaged the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. As the cathedral spire collapsed and much of its ribbed roof, made up of hundreds of wooden beams, was damaged, only the brave efforts of the firefighters ensured that the religious heritage landmark survived the night. 2 years after the tragic fire, the road to its restoration has been long and challenging, yet hope still carries on that the cathedral will return to its former glory. In an interview with Vatican News, Bishop Éric Aumonier explains the work of reconstruction underway and the continuous efforts to rebuild the cathedral. In February this year, Bishop Aumonier was appointed the representative of the Diocese of Paris for the follow-up of the restoration of the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Explaining the progress of reconstruction efforts, Bishop Aumonier said that the phase of securing the building is almost complete and will soon progress into the phase of restoration. He noted that a lot of work had to be done to clear the debris caused by the tragic fire incident 2 years ago, especially in the transept of the cathedral. At the same time, Bishop Aumonier pointed out that initial moves are being made to restore some of the side chapels which were soiled by the debris. Despite ongoing work, Bishop Aumonier noted the continuous use of the cathedral while respecting safety measures. During Holy Week this year, for example, liturgies were celebrated in the cathedral, albeit in a modest manner with the presence of the Archbishop to show the constant prayer of the Church. He added that he has also observed the reactions and the interest of Parisians who are closely following the work of reconstruction and are eager for the reopening of the cathedral. Responding to a question on his personal link to the cathedral, Bishop Aumonier said that his connection to the religious landmark is the same as every baptized person with Jesus himself. He, however, recalls in particular his episcopal ordination in 1996, which took place in the cathedral, and several other important events, including the visit of Pope St. John Paul II in 1980 and that of Pope Benedict XVI in 2008. I'm Father Benedict Mayaki.
And finally, Pope Francis this morning participated privately at the funeral mass of Archbishop Felix del Blanco Prieto, held at the altar of the chair in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. Archbishop Prieto died on the 10th of April at Rome's Gemelli Hospital at the age of 84. He served as papal almoner under Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI from 2007 to 2012. Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin presided at the Mass in the presence of Pope Francis. That brings us to the end of this edition of Vatican and World News. You can join us again tomorrow at this same time for more. You can also follow us on our portal, on Facebook and on Twitter. My thanks go to Roberto Colangeli in studio. In the Vatican, I'm Linda Bordoni. Bye-bye.